We're also going to be joined now by Anthony Gray. He is an attorney for Michael Brown's family, and we've spoken to him before, and it's good to see you. Counsel Gray, thank you for being with us on New Day this morning.
No problem. Thank you, Chris.
All right, so let's deal with what's out there, Counsel. You just had Officer Darren Wilson give his account. The main first point, the headline is, he feared for his life. He thought one more blow from Michael Brown, who was attacking him and came at him in his car, might have knocked him out or killed him. Your client, Michael Brown's mother, says, I do not believe his account, that he could be afraid for his life because of my son. Is that true?
Absolutely. It absolutely makes no sense whatsoever. At the point that you're in a car and you're trapped inside, I can halfway go along with the notion that you feel somewhat compromised. But now you outside of the vehicle, you have a weapon, you have someone who's injured, who's bleeding, whose blood is on you. At some point, they lose enough blood, they lose consciousness. So the notion that you think the only option that you have is to shoot and kill someone who you can see is unarmed is absolutely absurd. There are other avenues. There's takedown techniques. He could have used a weapon as an impact instrument. He could have done other things other than shoot and kill Mike Brown Jr. He wanted to do that, and he did what he wanted to do, not what he had to do.
He says that, you know, his answer, according to his descriptions, would be, you're giving me credit for being able to think in something that was a reflexive situation. I saw his hand go into his waistband, and in the car, he went for my gun, and the forensics do bear out that there was reason to believe that Michael Brown was at least around his gun in the car, and that's all went to why he was afraid for his life.
Sure.
Your response?
It's all laughable to me. First of all, you pull the gun out, and you're going to pull out a gun and point it at an unarmed person who you're also saying that you have his arm in a grip. So who's to say who's fearing for whose life at that point? Mike Brown Jr. doesn't have a right to fear for his life and defend himself from your weapon? It doesn't make any sense. And look at his statements before he got lawyered up, before he was prepped before the grand jury. Look what he said. He didn't say he pulled it out. He said the gun fell out the holster, as to assume that now we have a free gun somewhere in the car and they both make a grab for it. That's what his first statement was. Then he tells a quite different story to the detective that interviewed him. Then he tells an even larger, embellished story in front of the grand jury. Every statement he makes gets larger and larger, and then you want to talk about charging somebody with perjury. You look at his statements, you look at the physical evidence, they don't line up, period. They don't line up.
So why? So the big question becomes, Counsel, why did the grand jury believe him?
Because they didn't have him cross-examined. It was a friendly environment. He was able to just go and just tell his story freely. There were no hard-hitting questions. The inconsistencies that I see between the three statements that he made, nobody pointed them out. So quite naturally, you know, and then there's no recommendation to charge him with anything. You put in front of a grand jury a list of charges and you don't suggest which one matches the case that you want to bring. Everybody knows if you don't make a recommendation to a grand jury, that's an indication that you shouldn't indict, and they took the cue from the prosecutor as the way it was given to them.
You know, there's so much pressure that's been put on that an indictment was needed here so this could go to trial. A lot of legal experts, as you know, Counsel, being one yourself, say that this would have been a really hard case for prosecutors to win. That may feed in to why the prosecutor's office was somewhat reluctant, apparently, here. What would have happened then if it did go to trial, but it wound up being a not guilty verdict?
You know what? Then we would have had the judicial process and the full adjudication of this officer, the cross-examination, the direct examination, the inconsistencies vetted out openly in the courtroom, and if a jury then decided they didn't want to convict him or whatever charge was put before them, at least they would have had a charge that the prosecutor was saying that fit the case that the prosecutor was presenting. And if they came back and said, you know what, we reject your recommendation to convict him on those charges, you know, I think we can accept that as a people. And I think that's reasonable. But this situation was not that. It was just give you every and anything we could think of, even the stuff that's irrelevant. They had a witness there who they knew did not see anything. So what was the point of bringing that person before the grand jury? I don't get this data dump technique, putting all this information out there, most of which is irrelevant, and then you say, you guys decide which one of the 4 charges you have an option to do. You decide if any of this fits. Quite naturally, they're going to say, I'm totally confused, and I'm not going to, acquit. I'm sorry,
so
I'm
counsel,
not going to indict.
What are you going to do? Not going to indict, of course. That was the decision. The question now is, what are you going to do? There were some suggestions made during the press conference yesterday that we still need, you were saying from your point of view, we still need to have everything here put out in the open so people can judge it, the system can make the right kind of decision. How are you going to do that?
Well, it's not going to be my authority nor power to get that done. We are now resting and looking upon the federal investigation to continue. It's ongoing. We are hopeful that at least that process would, be a little bit more thoroughly vetted, more fairly presented. We don't know what's going to happen, but I can tell you this, just like with the state investigation, the federal investigation will be a direct reflection of the prosecutor's attitudes and how they present the evidence, and what evidence they present and what evidence they look at as well. 60 witnesses, Chris.
That's a closed process also. Though, and the bar is very high for a federal investigation. Counsel, let me ask you something. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving. Is there a message from the family about what they want people to keep in their heads and their hearts on Thanksgiving?
As it relates to this case, I think that this family has already issued a public statement. They're disappointed. They feel like the system has let them down. To the public at large, the call has always been the same, to remain peaceful and to remain calm. Quite naturally, there are people out there that have their own agenda. We make it very clear that those that go contrary to what our call is, they're not with us. They have their own agenda. We cannot associate their behavior with this family when from day one we've been calling for peace, nonviolence, and calm. So if somebody goes against that, we can't control them, but you need to understand, and the public at large needs to understand, that they are not with the Brown family and they are not in line with the Brown family's pleas.
Counsel, thank you very much. Appreciate having you on New Day, as always.
Thank you, Chris.